Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about what needs to be resilient, and it sounds rather obvious, but it's actually quite an interesting question when we start looking at the systems that we're managing as natural resource managers. Now in the Lorax we could see that the trees were an obvious resource that were valued by the Once community. Without the trees there, without that resource being able to provide that to the industry and the community, that whole entire community basically wasn't viable. But we can also think a little bit more broadly, because some of the other environmental services that were being provided by the natural systems in the Lorax were also equally important. So the ability of the water to assimilate the waste, and the ability of the air to assimilate some of the pollution from that industry were also just as important to that Once community, because it maintained a quality of life that they were used to. Obviously, as the Lorax story progresses, that ability of the natural systems to cope with the level of pollution that was being produced was exceeded, and that has obvious implications for the quality of life of the Once community. So we're shifting our thinking about how we manage natural resources based on what is valued by people, what is valued by our communities. And that is actually quite a difficult thing to do, because different people have different values, sometimes they're conflicting, and also the same people have values that change over time. And just to bring in some added complexity, in the future there's this huge amount of uncertainty that's only increasing. So how do we really manage values so that we can maintain and be confident in our ability to maintain a sustainable standard of living into the future? And this is where there's a shift in thinking. We're moving away from the definition of sustainable development, where we just simplistically talk about not using as many resources as the planet can renew over time, to a different way of thinking, whereby we manage resources now in a way that keeps our options open for the future. And that's a really different way of thinking about how we manage natural resources, but it provides for a safe operating space for all people. The other really important thing that we need to do when we're looking at what is to be resilient is to actually define a boundary of the system that we're going to be talking about. And often that's a little bit more difficult than what it may seem on the surface. And it's something, when you're actually applying resilience, it's something that you might have to go back to repeatedly until you get the right boundary for your system that everyone can agree on. So when we look at the Lorax, we can see that there are a number of different possible boundaries that we can encapsulate that system with. First of all, we can encapsulate the whole of the truffle forest, or maybe just the part of the truffle forest that this particular Once community relies on is more important. Maybe the whole entire world is important because of the pollution that occurs, which then affects downstream ecosystems. Or maybe just the actual Once community is the really important thing. So when we start looking at what's resilient in that system, we need to have this process of really thinking about what is part of the system, what is external to the system, but also we need to acknowledge that the system doesn't operate by itself. It has inflows and outflows, and we need to consider what the major influences are on the inflows and outflows as well.